Welcome to Lord Nightmare channel. We share scary stories with rainy ambience. I hope this video helps you in some way to sleep, relax, or just be entertained for a while. If you enjoy it, please think about subscribing and hitting the thumbs up button to help my channel out. Now let's begin. This happened when I was 18. I'm 22 now. I live in San Antonio, Texas. It was my senior year of high school, but this was when COVID just started blowing up, so everything began to shut down, including my school. Even though everyone was supposed to be staying home and being in quarantine, my friend group and I were going out more than ever. There wasn't much to do since all the non-essential businesses were closed. But one thing about me, I love urban exploring, or exploring haunted places. To this day, I still do. I'm not one to scare easily. I've had a couple experiences with the homeless, cults, even had a gun pointed at me, but nothing compared to how odd and creepy this one instance I came across while exploring was. Moving forward, around this time, I started talking to a girl who I had a class with in high school. Her name was Clarissa. If it weren't for her matching my alibi of what happened this night, I'm sure none of my friends would have believed me. We were still kind of freshly dating, but I somehow convinced her to explore a wooded natural park at 3 a.m. here in San Antonio. The park is called OP Schnabel. It's relatively nice, safe, and very scenic during the day. But at night, it can be a dangerous place, and police usually roam the entrances to the area at night, keeping people away. In 2016, a 24-year-old woman named Lauren Bump was brutally murdered and stabbed over 20 times. And in 2021, a boy exploring the woods was shot. Clarissa and I get to the park around 3 a.m. It's super creepy and pitch black. The trees do a really good job at covering the moonlight. I don't like to have my flashlight on because then my eyes can't adjust to the darkness, and you can really only see what's lit up from the light. Plus, I wouldn't want someone to see my light from a far distance, so I like to keep them off while exploring. We were probably about 15 to 20 minutes in walking the main trail. I didn't plan to be in there for too long because it was kind of creepy and oddly quiet that night. I knew a trail that goes off the road that leads back to where my truck was parked. I told her we could take that trail, essentially making a full circle instead of walking all the way back around. She agreed, and so we began walking through that off-road trail. We were probably only about 2 minutes into the off-road trail when suddenly out of nowhere, a flute began playing. Clarissa and I stopped dead in our tracks and looked at each other just listening. Whoever was playing it was super in cadence and sounded like it was playing some sort of piece of music. However, there was no time for me to process that it may have sounded good. It was creepy as fuck. As I said before, I don't scare easily, but 15 seconds into the flute solo, Clarissa began trembling in fear and on the brink of crying. I was kind of just listening, but when Clarissa started praying to God to save her and forgive her for her sins, that's when I realized the severity of the situation. To be clear, it was super hard to pinpoint where the sound of the flute was coming from. It sounded like it was coming from the direction of the previous main trail, which was parallel to where we were, with about maybe 30 to 50 yards of woods in between. But it was getting louder and closer, to the point where it sounded like the sound was right on top of us. Clarissa couldn't even focus because she was so scared, so I knew I had to man up and get us out of the situation. This is gonna sound corny, but I told her, "Don't worry, I'm not gonna let anything happen to you," and told her that we should run down the off-road trail to get away. So we did. We began to sprint. I believe the flute stopped playing, but it was hard to notice because I was more focused on getting the hell out of there. We only got about 30 feet when out of nowhere, we heard the rustling of bushes and the snapping of leaves and twigs before something big dashed across the trail right in front of us. Now this could have very well been a deer or some sort of bigger wildlife, but it was so strange because I could almost feel the size of whatever was in front of us. I don't know if it was from the wind or what. The only thing is, I never saw a silhouette or a shape of anything in front of us. Another strange thing is I didn't hear it coming and I didn't hear it run away. I only heard the dash right when it was right in front of us. As soon as we felt and heard whatever dashed across the trail right in front of us, we obviously turned back around and bolted in the other direction until we got back to the original point where we heard the flute. And then, as if whoever was playing it was waiting for us to return, the flute started to play again, loud and right on top of us. This time it was almost chiming. It sounded like it belonged to some sort of Irish jig song or something, but the chiming was still in cadence. However, it was still impossible to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. It was just surrounding us. At this point, my fight or flight instincts kicked in because we were trapped. We had two options: either go back into the off-road trail where we heard that terrifying dash right in front of us, or go back to the main trail where the flute and whatever psychopath was playing it was at. The off-road trail was definitely scarier because it was darker and surrounded by more dense forests, and at least the main trail was a cement path. Thus, I told Clarissa, who was still trembling in fear, let's start running down the main trail back to the truck. We ran back. Adrenaline was still pumping, so we cut the 20-minute walk into a 7 to 8 minute jog, and somewhere along the run, the flute noise must have stopped. Along the run back, there was a random porta potty, and I was scared to death because what if someone was on the other side or hiding inside of it, because it seemed to be somewhat parallel to where we were at earlier. Thankfully, I didn't see anyone, or signs of anyone ever having been there. In fact, my truck was the only vehicle in the area near the main entrance to the woods. We made it to the truck, and I sped far away from there. The next day, I told all my friends about it, and I looked all over the internet to see if anyone's ever come across anything like this. People claim to run into ghosts, cults, animals making terrifying noises, but a soft and rhythmic flute solo, I couldn't find anything on that. Or maybe I just didn't look hard enough. I tried to figure out all the possibilities. There are some houses that eventually led into a neighborhood on the far edge of the woods, but those houses are at least a couple miles away, and we were fairly deep into the woods, so there's no way the sound could have traveled that far because I'm telling you, the flute was clear as day and it was 3 a.m. Obviously, I never found out who was playing that flute, or what dashed right in front of us. I actually kind of got chills writing the story. The more I think about it, it actually seems more paranormal, rather than something scary on a tangible level. I don't know if it was a person, ghost, cult, or what. I'm really hoping someone might have a rational explanation. Either way, I never really went back to those woods at night. I still explore plenty of creepy places, but never really came across anything like that ever again. This happened about 4 years ago. My girlfriend and I were both 21 years old. We were driving up Highway 1 past Davenport, California. We spent the day at the beach and drove around some back roads in my Jeep. It started getting late, so we decided to head home. If you're not familiar with California's Highway 1, some stretches of the highway run along cliffs high above the ocean. There are a lot of turnouts along the way where people stop to watch the sunset. We were on a stretch of the highway far from any houses or businesses when I drove past a turnout that's almost always occupied by a car at sunset. This time it was empty. Since it was around sunset, I made a U-turn and backed into the spot. The turnout was small, with a huge dirt mound on one side and a steep cliff face with the trail going up about 60 feet on the other side. The gap between the two was about 16 feet. The mound was on the passenger side and the cliff face was on the driver's side. We were close to the edge, but it wasn't a sharp drop. There was a medium-sized dirt mound to prevent cars from rolling off the cliff. We were stoked to be there. We sat in the back of my Jeep, facing out over the ocean, watching the sky turn red. It was nice. About 25 minutes later, my girlfriend hopped out to get her water from the front of the car. When she came back and sat down, a black BMW SUV pulled up. As I said, the spot was tight enough for only one car, and though you could park two, it would mean parking directly in front of my car or blocking me in. That's exactly what this guy did. I was pretty annoyed because I think it's rude to block someone in a small spot. My girlfriend said, "What the hell?" I replied, "I know, right? What a rude guy." Then she added, "No, I mean I saw that car drive past when I was getting my water, and the guy looked at me." So it's weird that he turned around and parked here. That was strange and made me more annoyed. But it was a nice evening, so we brushed it off, thinking the guy would probably leave soon. We continued enjoying the sunset. 10 minutes later, the driver stepped out of his car. He was a yuppie-looking guy, probably in his late 40s or early 50s, about 6'3". He was wearing a button-up shirt and tie. He looked around, then slowly walked to the back of my car on the passenger side. He said hello to my girlfriend and me, and we replied, "Hi." There was a pause, and then he looked over the edge of the cliff and said, "That's a long way down." He turned back to us with a creepy half-smile. I was already feeling weirded out, so I just replied, "Yeah, it sure is," with a forced laugh at the end. He then asked, "Do you guys have any cigarettes? Maybe something healthy like American Spirits?" He called them healthy. Coincidentally, I did have some American Spirit cigarettes. They were on the dashboard in the front, so he must have seen them, making the way he asked seem even weirder to me. I gave him one and he said, "Ah, yes, thank you." He went back to his car and started rummaging through the back. My girlfriend and I exchanged looks. I said, "Isn't this kind of weird?" "Yeah, and why did he make that cliff comment?" She replied. A few minutes later, the guy came back with a fold-out chair and a small duffel bag. He put the duffel bag on the ground, folded up the chair, and sat right next to us about 3 feet away. He didn't have the cigarette I gave him anymore, and I don't think he even smoked it. He randomly started asking us questions like, "Are you guys homeless?" I just looked at him and said, "No man, we're not homeless," laughing awkwardly, trying to stay cool and not seem weirded out. Then he asked if we were from around the area. I said, "Yeah, we live in the mountains by Highway 17. He replied, "That's pretty far from here, isn't it?" I said, "It's like 30 to 45 minutes, so not too far." The sun was starting to get lower and it was getting dimmer. Mr. American Spirit reached into his duffel bag, pulled out some glasses and then a huge bottle of vodka. He asked if we wanted any. I said no, we're good. He insisted, "Come on, let's relax a little." I replied, "Nah, I need to drive." He said, "Suit yourself," then poured himself a big glass and drank it all at once. My girlfriend and I exchanged glances again, silently communicating. This is weird. We sat there in awkward silence for about 10 minutes. There was this weird tension in the air. Then out of nowhere he asked, "So does anyone know you're out here?" Wow, buddy, talk about a red flag. At this point I was getting annoyed because he was ruining the evening with his creepy questions. So I was short with him and said, "Yeah, most likely." He just nodded and didn't say anything. The whole interaction was just getting weirder, and I had this gut feeling something wasn't right. Eventually, I asked my girlfriend, "Well, should we wrap it up?" She immediately said yes. So I stood up and my girlfriend crawled into the Jeep. She went through the back seat into the front passenger. I closed the rear door, and as I did, the guy snapped his head toward me in this almost comically creepy way and said, "How are you gonna get out if I'm blocking you in like this?" At this point I'm just thinking, what the hell is wrong with this dude? But then I realized he had a good point. I tried to stay calm and said, "I think I got it." I got inside my Jeep, locked the doors, and started it up. My girlfriend said she saw him start rummaging through his duffel bag again. By this point I was feeling a rush of adrenaline, and everything started moving fast. I wasn't paying much attention to him and I engaged the four-wheel drive. There was just enough space between his car and the cliff face for me to angle my driver's side up the cliff. My Jeep was tilted at a sharp 45-degree angle, which was sketchy because as I slammed the gas, I looked in my mirror and saw the guy walking quickly toward my side. I barely managed to get past his car without hitting it or flipping my Jeep onto it. Once I did, I peeled out of there. My girlfriend and I were like, holy hell. We looked back at the guy as we drove away. He was standing there with a blank expression, holding something long in his right hand close to his side. I don't know what it was. He just stood there for a second, then quickly started packing up his things. I had to pull over real quick to put my Jeep back into two-wheel drive before going faster down the road. We saw the guy pull out and drive away in the opposite direction. We never saw him again after that. I'll never park along the highway one near nighttime again. It was mid-December. I was only 17 at the time, and every year just before Christmas week, my mom had to go on a 3-day business trip for work. Being an only child that lived just with my mom, I'd spend these days that she was gone, home alone. Usually she'd leave just before winter break, so I'd be in school for most of the day. But this year she left the same day that our school let out for the holidays. I had the house to myself and wanted nothing more than to stay inside and chill all day. Our city was going through somewhat of a snowstorm, so I couldn't really leave the house anyway. I made some of the food that was left for me and found a new movie to watch. I had to pause it several times throughout the couple hours though, because the wind and snow would suddenly pick up and get really loud. It seems like every time I looked outside, the weather was worse. Then, around 7 or 8, someone was walking up to the front door. I could hear their footsteps kicking against the snow, and they coughed several times as they slowly made their way up to the porch. I didn't have a clue who it could be. I paused everything and looked at the door, waiting for them to knock or ring the doorbell. As more time passed though, I could feel myself getting nervous, as something didn't feel right. I want to say I waited 3 or 4 minutes, not hearing anything, before I went up to the door and looked outside. Nobody was there. I could see the footsteps coming right up to the door, then going back the way they came. I was really confused how clearly I heard them walk up, but somehow I didn't hear them leave. Also, with the snowstorm outside, what reason could someone have to come up to my house? I think the only reason I could settle on was that the snow made it difficult to see, and they mistook my house for theirs. Maybe they realized once they got up to the porch and didn't want to alarm anyone, so they quietly left. It's probably a bit of a stretch, but I guess it was possible. After a while, I'd mostly stopped thinking about the situation and was more caught up worrying about the storm. The power cut out a few times, lasting for several minutes before it came back on. Because of that, I couldn't really watch TV or anything, so I just sat on the couch and scrolled on my phone. It was maybe around 11 when, through the harsh wind, I heard a thump against the house. I initially ignored it, but only a few moments later, the power cut out again. Thinking the thump might have caused it, I got up. It sounded like it was from the side, near the kitchen, so I turned my phone light on, then walked over and looked around. I thought it was probably just a coincidence that the power shut off right after I heard the thump, but I just wanted to be sure nothing happened. I didn't see anything, and I started to walk away. Hey! I jumped and looked at the back door, seeing a man standing against the other side. The back porch light wasn't on, so he was mostly covered by the dark. I could only see his face peering in at me. Hey kid, would you get the door for me? It's freezing out here, he said, putting his hand on the door and trying to open it. My head wasn't fully grasping the situation yet, and I kind of just stood there and stared at him. Kid, get the door, please. Something gave me a bad feeling. I knew better than to trust this guy, even though it was a blizzard outside. The man started coughing, and I started to back off, and the man's face instantly fell into a disturbing frown. "Open the fucking door," he yelled, banging his fist against it several times. I ran back to the couch and got my phone, and then stood in the hallway and watched the man as I dialed 911. My phone was struggling to hold service and kept dropping the call, but after a few tries, I was able to get through long enough to ask for help. The man at the door continued to yell at me and hit the door, but eventually ran off. I'm assuming the snowstorm caused some trouble for the police, as they didn't make it until nearly 30 minutes after. I told them what I could, and I called my mom to let her know what happened. Nobody really knew what to think of it. He could have been stalking me and trying to guilt me into letting him in, or he could have actually been in need of help, although it's unlikely. I never saw him again after that night though.